Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Survive and Thrive webinar series. I'm Rachel Perkins, the Education Outreach Specialist for Texas Oncology Foundation, and we are so glad to have you all with us today. We're excited to hear from Stephanie Broussard discussing Everybody Has a Story. So let me give you a little bit of a background about the foundation. The Texas Oncology Foundation is dedicated to providing support to cancer patients in the communities where they live, work, and receive treatment. Through Survive and Thrive programming, the foundation can provide educational events like this one and resources to help build community connections and support all involved in the cancer journey. The webinar is being recorded and the online archive will be available for viewing after the live session. The recording will be sent to everyone in the follow-up email and will be available on our Texas Oncology Foundation website. You're going to go to texasoncologyfoundation.org, and then you're going to go to Education, which is Survive and Thrive webinar series. And then you're going to go ahead and see that we have upcoming webinars as well as our resource archive that you'll be able to find these resources. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our amazing speaker today. Stephanie Broussard is a licensed clinical social work supervisor and an advanced palliative care hospital social worker. Stephanie is actually the Director of Palliative Care and Social Work at Texas Oncology, and her passion for helping others navigate the complexities of life lead her to palliative care, where she specializes in helping patients and their families cope with illnesses and life transitions. So, Stephanie, when you're ready, go ahead and share your screen.
Before I start my share my screen, I just wanted to say how glad I am to be here with you guys. Is indeed an honor for me to always be able to support the Texas Oncology Foundation and the amazing work that goes forth here at the foundation. One of the things that I know to be true is that the foundation helps to support in ways that many people dealing with cancer need access. And so I want to just thank you guys publicly, as I've always said, privately, for all you do to not only support our patients, but the greater cancer community. So as Rachel mentioned, I'm Stephanie Broussard, and I'm the Director of Palliative Care and Social Work here at Texas Oncology. And so I have the honor of being able to lead and direct many of our supportive services here in Texas. And with that, one of the things that we set out to do almost a year or so ago now was to gain a better understanding of the needs of the cancer community. And so one thing we know is that when we see our patients, we know they have needs. We know that cancer impacts the whole system. Well, we thought we knew, but we wanted to have more concrete information, more concrete evidence about what does it look like for our patients' experiences. And so we set out to complete a survey of sorts to get a better understanding of what are the stories that go on within our patients. What are their experiences? What are the things that maybe we think we know, but maybe we really don't have a clear perspective of? And so we sat out and completed this survey with about 150 participants in Texas who are dealing with cancer. And we are now calling the findings and our efforts as a result of that survey and the needs of patients. We're now calling it Everybody Has a Story. And so what I'm going to do is ask you guys who are in the chat, when you hear Everybody Has a Story, what comes to mind? What do you think about when someone says everybody has a story or everybody has a story? What comes to mind for you guys? When I think about hearing everybody has a story, I actually say it both ways because the reality is everybody has a story, meaning every person, every human has a human experience and as a result has a story. But when I think about it as a clinician, I also think everybody has a story. And so when we talk today, I want you guys to be able to think about it both ways, okay? That every one of us has our lived experiences and our life and our personal perspectives that bring forth in our experiences. But also everyone who's been impacted by cancer has a different experience, a different story. In the chat I see here, people react differently to situations. So their experiences are different. Absolutely. There isn't a blanket response to any experience, let alone living or being impacted by cancer. So there's no right or wrong. However, we have to be able to identify that everybody has a story and how do we support those stories. So when we completed the survey, one of the things that we realized is that not only is this good for us to have this information, not only is it good for us to have this information, but we have to be able to do something with it. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that you guys can see a little bit about what we've come up with. All right. So what we find when we completed this survey, the reality was that, sorry about that. The reality is that everyone has a story, and there's some things that we thought we knew that we found out in doing this work. So when we got the information, it wasn't enough for us to just have the information. What do we do with it, right? Now that we have this perspective. And so we decided that we wanted to spark a conversation on cancer, body image, and mental health. What if we were to change the narrative regarding these supports? And not only change the narrative in the greater cancer community, it also forces us to change the narrative within how we practice, how we serve people. Because the reality is that it's not enough to just take care of the physical needs of people. We need to be able to take care of them holistically. And what does that look like? To really change what that looks like in the greater cancer community. So in our survey, one of the things that we found was that the physical impacts of cancer not only impact their bodies physically, but there's an impact on body image. There's an impact on mental health. And so some of the findings were really interesting, even after doing this work all this time. 50% of patients reported that they felt less attractive after being diagnosed with cancer or receiving treatment. 42% felt less self-confident. 37% did not feel as comfortable in their own skin, 36% avoided intimacy, and 31% felt less feminine or masculine as a result of treatment. And so some of these things are things that, we don't necessarily anticipate, or we're anticipating exchanges or experiences for patients. And so what could we do to be more aware that we can validate experiences of people first and foremost, but then also make sure that we're providing supports to address these things as they come up? For example, the body image and the changes. Are there some body image changes that we anticipate and can expect? And how do we make sure that patients are aware of them, but also we get access to support that maybe be able to support them? For example, we're not going to become a beauty consultation service, right? But it is important for us to acknowledge that the impact of body image and those changes can impact an individual emotionally and create a level of distress. And so how do we make sure that that's part of the conversation so people aren't surprised by things we know may come? And when we talk about confidence, this is one of the things that I've recently begun talking about with patients, is that sometimes when you are faced with something that is a serious illness, it may impact your confidence because do you trust yourself? Is there something you missed? People have questions. It even creates existential crisis or even spiritual crisis that impact the questions about what we believe. And confidence is so also connected to sometimes body image. So when I walk into a room, do I still feel like myself? Do I still feel good in my skin? And even when it comes to intimacy and relationships, does that change how I'm received in those settings? 70% said that their physical changes they experienced during cancer treatment had a negative effect on their mental health, meaning that it's ways. And so how do we acknowledge that it's not superficial, it's not vain, but the impact of the physical changes, the aesthetic changes, even our body image, does have a mental health component. So that body has a story. And how do we make sure that people are equipped with what they need to emotionally deal and cope with those changes? Most respondents felt unprepared, about 43%, then prepared, 39%, to deal with the physical side effects of their treatment. So I think about this as a call to action for, of course, the greater cancer community and clinicians. Some of these things we may be aware of. We may be aware and see that they may be part of treatment or expectations in regards to change in condition. So how do we make sure that when the physical changes, the emotional changes, the body image concerns, how do we really bring these items forward and adequately provide education to patients, adequately provide support tools for family members and caregivers to make sure they're adequately able to convey what support looks like and needs for those individuals. And then most importantly, make sure that everyone has what they need to be able to move forward and navigate successfully. 56% felt unprepared to deal with the mental side effects, and just 26% felt prepared. So as a mental health clinician, for me, one of the things that I know to be true is oftentimes people don't feel that they're safe spaces to talk about some of these things. Our society still has a narrative where if we talk about mental health and we talk about depression or anxiety, that it's taboo. I've even had patients tell me that they thought that part of the suffering was part of the par for the course, that they had to go in. So there are people who are worse off than them. So for them to talk about their emotional needs related to their body image or the changes in condition seemed unfair when people were worse off. And so the first thing I'd like to acknowledge is that everybody has a story and everybody's story deserves to be heard. Meaning that this is not the suffering wars or competition. Regardless of what your story is, how big or how small, every story matters. And so we want people to feel empowered to share their story, but not just share it performatively, but share it so that we can figure out how to make sure that we all as a community in a greater cancer community are working towards giving people the space and support necessary. Okay. And so that looks like creating mental health resources and supports. And this is what I love about the Texas Oncology Foundation. It wasn't enough for them to just hear, hey, it sounds like the Texas Oncology did this and we now have this information. They were like, how can we support getting this message out? How can we support making sure that individuals living with cancer felt empowered and encouraged to really identify that depression and anxiety, although many experience them, they don't have to navigate it alone? How do we validate that the emotional changes that accompany body image, although many experience them, they don't have to navigate them without support, or it's something you should bring to your clinical team? I think people think that their doctor's worried about their treatment, their doctor's worried about fighting their cancer, so all the stuff they just have to suffer and carry. And we don't think that has to be true. We think that there really is a space for us to give adequate support to those things that matter to you as well. And so we know that there is a layer of grief that comes with navigating cancer. And so that means that grief isn't relinquished to losing experiences or losing people. It could be losing life as you knew it. Losing your body changes as you knew them, right? Your body is what you used to look at and recall those changes. There's a level of grief there. Even people sometimes experience anticipatory grief depending on what they may be facing ahead. And so we want to make sure that we're looking for those things. We're looking for, especially for caregivers and family members, looking for when our loved ones are navigating and maybe withdrawing from family or expressing hopelessness or helplessness, or maybe some changes to their behavior. We want to make sure that we're identifying those things because sometimes it's difficult to say that I'm struggling. It's difficult because we have to hold the ambivalence of feelings. You're focused on your cancer. You may even be proud of what's happening in regards to your improvement in your condition. And so sometimes I've had even patients say to me, why would I ever bring up other things when I need to be focused on my cancer? And we don't want to neglect any part of you. We don't want to neglect your emotional needs because we're focused on cancer. Yes, we're focused on it, but we don't want to forget you in the process. You matter. Your story matters. And so when we think about facing situations and everybody having a story, one of the things we want to do as we continue to talk about this is try to make sure that people feel that it is safe to talk about their emotional needs, okay? We talk a lot about hope when we talk about cancer, right? And hope is what will carry us and supports us. But we also have to talk about the realities that sometimes as we hold hope, that we also hold sadness. Or as we hold hope, we also hold grief. Or as we hold hope, we also hold fears and worries and disappointments or frustrations and loss even. And so it is important for us to acknowledge that you don't have to neglect one for the other, or you lose hope if you acknowledge the other. We can hold both. And so that may look like helping to teach each other. What does it look like to hold the ambivalence? Or validating that you can be really excited about the outcomes and that you're still here, but also very disappointed that the body that you look at in the mirror, you no longer recognize. It's important for us to acknowledge that that too is part of the story, that sometimes with the victories, we may experience valleys. And so how do we make sure that we aren't setting the community up or ourselves or individuals, or even if we're the patient, how do we make sure that we aren't in a place where we feel like we have to bottle up any feeling that isn't positive, or we have to bottle up any feeling that says that I have some disappointments or frustrations or fears? I believe there's room for both. I don't believe our hope snuffs out, or we, demolish our hope or our fight, we lose something as a result of acknowledging that we have some other feelings as well. And so I hope that's validating for someone to say, you know what? We believe that there is something on the other side that may be positive, that may be better than where we are today. But that doesn't negate that today you're sad, today you're frustrated, today you're disappointed, today the body you're in doesn't feel like your own. So how can we help you reconnect with that body? How can we help you to learn to trust your body again when you maybe feel like it's failed you? We want to be able to acknowledge that those feelings exist and are real, and doesn't make you a bad person, doesn't mean you're not grateful, doesn't mean you're not even hopeful. It just means that today you're human and your body has a story. And part of that story may include those feelings. And so we want to validate that support is there and it's necessary, and change that conversation. It's about the greater mental health conversation in our communities, but also about the mental health conversation in regards to cancer care as well. So when we think about support, and I want to talk a little bit about the ways that we can help support, engage in support if we're the individual, but also engage in support if we're the patient. So if we're the individual, I want to remind you that your story matters. You're going to hear me say it a million times. Everybody has a story, and your story matters. No matter how big or how small, it's important. So I want to empower you to share your story. It's not going to bring the people around you down. It's not going to frustrate them. It is not that. Your story matters. So please share your story. The second thing I want to remind you is that your story may encourage someone else. There is validation in hearing the experiences of others. And sometimes we think that we're the only one hurting, the only one who may experience disappointments or sadness, or the only one who's experienced the victories or the ambivalence. You sharing your story may be just the hope that someone needs, or the light that someone needs. The third thing I want to encourage you guys to do is that, for example, when you're looking at your story and maybe you can't see, it's foggy, it's heavy, seek help. Okay. Part of what we want to do is make sure that we normalize seeking support. We normalize seeking mental health treatment in conjunction with cancer care, because that doesn't mean you can't handle it. That doesn't mean you're weak. It means that we're humans having human experiences, and sometimes that looks like support for others. One of the things I share with patients all the time is if your blood pressure were extremely high and you came to me, what we're going to do is try to get interventions for your blood pressure to help you feel better. Well, the same thing with your emotional well-being. If you're sad, having anxiety, or dealing with anything that may be a burden for you, share that with us so we can get you the help you need. And then from our caregivers, we want to remind you that asking those questions, how are you? What can I do to support you? What would support look like for you? Letting your loved one lead the conversation and creating space for when they're ready, because they may not be ready just because you asked the question, and they may not know or have the answer. So stay present. Let them talk about the things that are important to them, and it may not always be about their cancer. They may not want to talk about that all the time. Don't forget that there's a person navigating this experience. Cry with them if they want to cry, laugh with them if they want to laugh. Help them with practical things such as needs, and then make sure that you continue to do things that they love as part of their routine. So everybody has a story. What's yours? You know, I think everybody has a story. When you hear this and you think about hearing that people are dealing with depression or anxiety, or people feel like they have to go alone, I would love to hear from the perspective of you guys in the chat about, number one, if anything resonated with you, or what do you think opportunities are for us as a greater cancer community? But then also, what's your story?
Awesome. We will give everyone a second to share their story in the chat. I just want to say thank you so much for sharing that with us. Those findings are amazing. I had no idea that the statistics were that high of people who feeling unprepared mentally to go through the cancer experience. So
yeah. And I think, one of the things that we talk a lot about is we talk about the treatment, we talk about the physical side effects like the nausea, fatigue, debility. But I think and I'll say it as a clinician, one of the things I think we haven't done a good job of preparing is that to say that and normalizing people will feel differently. And especially when it comes to the body image questions and conversation, I don't think we knew as a whole. And so I think this was a surprise finding of this survey, is that the body image piece is a conversation that we really haven't had. I think the breast cancer community had a great stint talking about, around the surgical incisions and what that looks like and owning your body. But I think we've forgotten some populations in regards to that. So it was an unexpected finding that really is driving where we are now with this conversation.
Hmm. So I'll go ahead and start off with the questions, because I know it can
Okay.
be a little nerve-wracking as the first question out there. So one of the things as you're going through your presentation that came to my mind is, how do you tell the difficult parts of your story? Because like you said, there's kind of taboo. You're supposed to be like, this is my cancer experience, and this is what I'm going through. So how do you tell the difficult part of your story, like feeling less attractive or having less self-confidence? Where do you
Yeah, I
start?
think that's a really great question. I think one thing that's really important is that safety and security. So I'm a big believer that I'm a kind of an open book, but there's some parts of my story that I save for the most secure spaces in my life because I don't want to harm myself, right? So making sure that it's a safe space is the first part, because you don't want to share your story with someone that doesn't have the capacity to hear you or see you in the way you need to.
Mm-hmm.
And so the other part of that is sharing what you're comfortable with. And as your comfort grows, expanding to different parts of that. And so, but the most important thing is that, especially if you're with the clinical team and your providers, is making sure that you feel empowered and aren't embarrassed. Because I think that's the goal, right? To take some of these things, take the sting out of them, to say that we have to normalize really how to have those difficult conversations, especially with our healthcare team. But I think it's more difficult with the people around you and the intimate people. And so you want to prepare them. One of the things I tee up conversations, I'm going to have a difficult conversation with my family. And when I'm talking to patients and we're role playing,
Mm-hmm.
we tee up and say, hey, I want to share something with you. It's really hard for me, so that they know how to receive you as well.
That's good. Kind of setting expectations.
Absolutely. In the chat, I see a comment. It says, I'm losing my hair for the second time, and it's just as hard as the first time, even though I knew it would happen. Also, my eyelashes. I think the important part of that, thank you so much for sharing with us and your vulnerability. I think the reality is that even knowing doesn't change the fact that it hurts, right? And that's something, even when we talk about like anticipatory grief, it's that you can know it and it still feel difficult and hard to adjust and live with. But one of the things that we're hoping with the awareness is that we can help with coping skills as you navigate it, to make sure that we're saying this may happen, this may be part of your experience, but you're still worthy. You're still loved, you're still cared for, you're still seen, you're still heard, you're still beautiful, you're still, and because some of those things can feel superficial, right? Like hearing you're beautiful, and you may not even believe it if somebody tells you when you're having these experiences, but knowing how to fill your tank when you may feel depleted. But also normalizing that the fears and frustrations and disappointments that you have with it are valid, right? Because sometimes people can think it's superficial to be upset about losing your hair or your eyelashes. Actually, no, that's part of you, that's part of your body. And so we want to validate that, like, no matter how many times you experience it, it's hard, and you get to say that. And so I hope you have support with navigating that. And I think I want to just thank you for validating, because some people will think, oh, you've done it, so you should be fine. No, no matter how many times you experience it, I think it's still a valid experience, that no matter how difficult. Another comment says, I use Caring Bridge to tell how I handle the hard things with God's help, but I still don't want people to feel sorry for me, so I only go so far. Ooh, I'm so glad you said that. So I have a patient a long time ago that used to say, no one is invited to my pity party. And I think when we think about our own suffering, and we think about, especially what I've heard from patients, when they don't want their families to feel sorry for them, they don't want the pity, or and so they want empathy, of course, but they don't want sympathy. And one of the things I would encourage anyone thinking of that is, number one is share what you're comfortable with, right? And those boundaries, and that's for you. But also, it's okay to set the tone of expectations of what you want from people too. To say, here's where I am, here's how I'm feeling, but what we're not going to do is do A, B, and C. Or I would love any kind of support, but here's what support looks like for me. And so that can feel very direct, and that can feel, like you're asking for something that may feel unorthodox. But that is how you control that narrative, but still allow people to be present for you, because sometimes they want to be present in any way they can, and they don't know what that looks like for you. So rather than, that's like, for example, having people deliver, food to you, and they're trying to support in the way that they think they can, when really you're like, smells bother me, I have to throw this away. So making sure that we reach out and let people know how to support us. And that can be as easy as, I don't want you to feel sorry for me. I want your support. I want you to be present, but this is not a pity party.
Mm-hmm. That is huge. I wrote down, sometimes you don't want sympathy, you just want empathy. That is
Yeah.
such a strong way to say that.
Yeah. And then also, I love the idea of using Caring Bridge. We have Caring Bridge and Careopolis. Is something that we also have for our Texas Oncology patients. Careopolis is a tool that allows you to do photo messages, videos, that kind of thing, to update and tell your care team and your family or friends how you're doing or where you are. And then Caring Bridge to tell how you handle the hard things with God's help. And I think leaning on your faith or your spirituality, whatever is important to you, you want to engage in those things, and make sure that that's how you get support and get through.
Okay, so I have another question for you. Why do you think physicians don't discuss mental health or spirituality during diagnosis and treatment? Why do you think that's something that's kind of left out?
So I don't, I think, as I think about it, I think the perspective of holistic care has grown
Mm-hmm.
in just in general. And so I think we're doing a better job, but I think we have a lot of work to do as a cancer community as a whole. But I think it goes back to society, right? For example, when we think about mental health and emotional well-being as a society, probably in the last 3 years have we just started really having those conversations openly. And so it was taboo. And I think even if we're aware, even if clinicians and providers are aware of that, there still may be a level of discomfort in that. And so part of what we're doing is really working out, and not just us, the cancer community, everywhere you go, we're all changing about how we screen patients. And so one of the new cancer standards is that every patient screened for emotional distress. That's literally happened in the last 3 to 5 years. And so prior to that, that didn't happen. And so the research is clear about the needs of patients, and I believe that will continue to change. But I will say also, the physicians, part of having multidisciplinary teams is so that the physicians can focus on their expertise, and then allow, whether it's an APP or a social worker or a psychologist or a psycho-oncologist, allowing all those people to do their expertise and address your mental health needs as well.
Mm-hmm. So just kind of redoing that check-in throughout the process as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any, I know we talked about Caropolis and we talked about Caring Bridge, but you did mention a few other options where people can start this process of being able to discuss their mental health and, be able to say their needs. Are there any other resources that you have for people just at the top of your head?
Yeah. So one of them is a good pen and paper. I'm a journal girl, and one of the things I believe that's really important is to find a way to capture your story. And so I don't want you to think like you're going to, write a memoir. You may, but really it's about getting those feelings out and acknowledging them. And that's really important, is finding a space to acknowledge those feelings so that you aren't just stifling them, because they have to get out. So if you're not comfortable talking to a person and seeing a clinician, or seeing a therapist or something like that, we want to make sure that there's a safe place for you to get those things out. And so start with yourself. So start writing those things down, or some people use voice memos, whatever is comfortable for you. And
Yeah,
then,
so
of course, my next recommendation would be, of course, seeing someone or joining support groups. The foundation offers great support groups. And of course, most cancer facilities offer support groups of some kind. We offer some virtually and in person. So getting around people who, and a lot of the other organizations, getting around people whose experience have shared experiences as well, is really great in creating community.
yeah.
There's a comment here that says, I look very healthy and I feel like it works against me when I go for treatments. I watch the really sick patients get all kinds of loving care, and my care is usually more clinical. Sometimes I want to say I need special care too. Listen, that's good. It kind of put a pit in my stomach, because I think that's where, in general, I think the cancer community fails, right? I think the public, we are aware, and as medical advances improve, all of our patients don't look sick. Right. And that's a beautiful thing. That's great. But the reality is that the magnitude of care and the level of kindness and compassion, but also the level of support that's necessary is still the same. And so I think we have to do a better job of that. And that's part of what I believe the new cancer care dynamics have kind of shifted to, is where we do screening for everybody to try to get a better perspective. But I also think that that's something that requires education and intention. And that's what I really loved about the survey, is that we found out everybody has a story, no matter what it looks like, no matter what our perception is that everybody needs support. And so I think that's helped us to try to change that narrative. So I love that comment so much.
Yeah, that is a really good one. That makes me think of when you said, we don't want to neglect any part of you, and we don't want to neglect that you may look healthy, but you still need special
Absolutely,
attention.
absolutely. And the not just the individual, but the families are still impacted regardless of, those kind of things too. And so I think it's hard for patients who do look well, right? Because also their public probably doesn't see them as having needs. Their family members may not perceive the needs the same either, because we have a perception in our society about what cancer, someone living with cancer, looks like, right? And it's just not the case. And so we have to be more aware. We have to be more cognizant. And I think it's important for us to change that narrative as well.
Yeah, and I also saw a lot of thought when you said support by telling your story, so you can like encourage someone else, or you can help someone else by telling your own story.
Yeah. So I don't think, I'm one of those people that says you get to be selfish in this season, right? I believe that when you're navigating difficult experiences, are people sometimes impacted and touched by how you navigate them? Absolutely. Do we do better when we're expressing gratitude and in community? Absolutely. Having said that, it is okay for you to own your story and it just be about you. But in the same vein, I wanted to make it very clear that sometimes there are people whose experiences are drastically changed by hearing how you navigated them. For example, the comment about I look healthy and I don't feel seen or heard or in the same way. Somebody who was having that same experience was probably holding on to that and thought that they didn't deserve to be seen and heard. And you acknowledging that you needed that, it's probably validated that for somebody else. And so it's that small. It could be that small or that large, right? I actually have a patient who had lost her husband to cancer, and she was newly diagnosed and was trying to figure out, what does this look like? I've been the supportive caregiver all this time, but now where's the support for me? And when she verbalized that, someone else kind of had that same experience and was able to say, was further along in their journey, and was able to say what their transition was like. And it was like it was a light bulb went off, because sometimes you don't know where to start, what to look like, and that peer support. And so really being able to say, share your story, it's about you. You get to own it. But sometimes there are people who are also impacted by your willingness to share that.
It's almost like you're allowed to have this selfish era. It's all about you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's not even the fact that like everybody, how we share doesn't look the same. Somebody might have a podcast, somebody might do it in support groups, somebody might go, or it's you sharing with somebody in the next infusion chair, or it's you sharing with somebody at the grocery store when you see their fight cancer tea, or whatever. It could be so small as a comment on anything. It really doesn't look the same. We're all individuals, and how we share and what that looks like will look differently as well.
Okay. So I think that is the last of our questions. So I'll go ahead and start to close. I want to start off by saying thank you, Stephanie. I appreciate you for coming today. You always have such great nuggets of wisdom for us, and you're so supportive of the Texas Oncology Foundation, and we're just very thankful for you for coming here today. I wanted to remind everyone that the session was recorded and will be sent to all registrants in a follow-up email. It will also be on our Texas Oncology Foundation website, and it will be on our YouTube channel as well. So if you're on YouTube and you're like, I just need a little bit of support, you can always look up Texas Oncology Foundation, and we have an entire webinar series that you can kind of go through and get some inspiration. This is what our new website looks like. If you type in texasoncologyfoundation.org, you're going to go to the Education tab and click on Survive and Thrive webinar. From here, you can see all the upcoming webinars, And you can also see the resource archive here. So there are upcoming webinars, but also you'll be able to access any of our webinars from the past with legal and financial, cancer treatment, caregivers, nutrition, and wellness. All of them are going to be on the bottom right here. If you also need a little bit more inspiration, you can like our Facebook page and stay up to current events with our foundation. And we have a couple upcoming webinars. We're doing them every second and fourth Tuesday of the month. Our next one is going to be on love languages in cancer. So I know some of us might have already heard about the 5 love languages, but this is immediately to cancer and how it corresponds with cancer, and it looks a little bit different. So it's not exactly like reading the book. We also have a couple other programs as well. We have mentors and meetups coming soon, and those are hybrid, so you can do them online or in a city near you. And lastly, we value feedback from our community. So in our follow-up emails, there will be a link to a survey. I'll actually put it in the chat here as well. And this allows us to just see how we did in our presentation today, to see if there's any topics that you would like us to cover, just your thoughts on today's presentations. And we take this feedback very seriously. So go ahead and give that a look. And thank you so much, Stephanie. I appreciate your time today. I hope that you have a great day, and we will see everyone on the next webinar, which is November 14th at 11 a.m. All right. Bye, guys.